This is just a really basic explanation on how you get started with pressure canning. This is a Presto 23 quart canner. You want to make sure your canner's clean, obviously. I don't actually wash it thoroughly between each use, but if there's a whole lot of siphoning, then I'll actually wash it with soap and water. Otherwise, most of the time I'll just rinse it really, really good because what's in the canner is not going to get in your jars. Now, before you do anything else in your canner, you want to make sure you have a rack. And you don't want the jars to touch the bottom of the canner. Now, when you're pressure canning, you don't want to fill the water up all the way. Make sure you check the manual for whatever canner you have, but with the Presto, it only calls for 3 quarts of water. There is a line etched to the inside of the canner that shows how much water it is, or you could just take a quart-sized jar and fill it up 3 times. So if you look on the inside of the canner, you can see the line where I typically fill mine up. And then the actual pressure canning notch is right there. Now, the difference between the notch and the line you see is just water displacement from when the jars are put in the canner. If you reference the notch on the inside of the canner, make sure you do it when the canner is empty, except for maybe the rack. You also want to make sure that the temperature of the water that you put in the canner is about the same temperature as whatever it is that you're canning. So if I'm doing raw cold stuff right now, I'm going to make sure I put cold water in the canner. If the food is hot that you're putting in the canner, you want to make sure that the canner is hot. So you can either start with cold water and just turn the canner on or turn the fire on, or you can put hot water in and then still warm it up with the fire on. Another tip is if you have hard water, you might want to put just a splash of white vinegar in your canner. That way it keeps the hard water film from building up over your jars. It doesn't hurt anything, it just looks bad. Now I've got 1 rack of jars in the canner. This canner will hold 7 pints, and then I'm going to put the second rack on top of it so that I can add more pints on top. This canner will double stack half pints and pints, but you can't double stack quarts in this. It's just not big enough. Remember that your water is not going to go on top of your jars. The canner processes with the steam from the little bit of water at the bottom. Now that the canner's full, I'm going to want to put the lid on, but first I want to check it and make sure everything's okay. Since your canner lid is what contains all of your safety features, it's really important to double check that everything is in working order before you process anything. So to start, you want to make sure that your rubber seal is still in good shape, no cracks, no rips, nothing like that, and that it's fitting snug underneath your the rim of your lid. Another thing that you want to check is that nothing is blocking your vent. The way I do that is I just hold my canner up to the window and make sure that I can see light through. There we go. So as long as you can see light through the vent, it should be okay. Sometimes just to be safe, I will blow in it just to make sure everything's fine. And then you want to make sure that this top here, this little rubber piece is that it moves around and it's not stuck, like it doesn't have anything stuck under it. And your pressure indicator, you want to make sure that it freely moves up and down with ease. Lastly, I'm going to make sure that my pressure gauge is screwed on tightly, and then we can screw the lid on. This canner, there's an indicator of where the lid is supposed to go. If you look here, it shows a little arrow, and there's also an arrow on this handle to show that is where you put it on and turn the handles to lock it in place. Next, I'm going to turn my burner on. So I usually turn it to a medium low, and it does take a little bit longer for the canner to warm up like that, but you have less of a chance of anything being temperature shocked or siphoning happening in your jars. Now I'm going to let the canner warm up. As it warms up, the water that's at the bottom of the canner is going to start to boil, and this is going to cause steam to come out of this vent right here. Once you get a steady stream of steam, you're going to set a timer for 10 minutes, and this is going to release all the oxygen out of the canner. When the 10 minutes is up and it's time to put your weight on the canner, what your weight is set to is going to depend on your elevation. So since my elevation is about 700 feet, I only need a 10-pound regulator for my canner. Now the standard that comes with this Presto canner is a 15-pound weight. If this is all you have, it's okay. More PSI, more pounds is not gonna hurt your food. It's just gonna cook it a little bit more. But if you can swing the weighted jiggler, I would do that. It is a game changer and you don't have to babysit the fire when you use one of these. So when the time is up, the 10 minutes, you're going to place your regulator on top of the vent. Don't be scared of the steam. As long as you just do it quickly, it shouldn't burn you. Now that I have the weighted regulator on, this pops up to indicate that there is pressure inside the canner. Do not remove the weighted regulator or the lid as long as this is lifted up. The gauge should start to rise as the pressure builds inside the canner. Once it reaches the PSI that I need, which is 10, this is going to start to jiggle, and once that starts jiggling, I can set my timer for 75 minutes or whatever the time is for the food that you're processing. Once it gets slightly past 10 PSI, that's when the regulator will start to jiggle, and it jiggles to release steam to try to keep the PSI at and around whatever the weight it's set to. And in this instance, it's 10, so it stays right around 11 as long as that stays jiggling. And now I can set my timer. What I'm processing has meat in it, so I'm setting 75 minutes for pint jars. When the timer goes off, I don't shut the fire off all the way yet. I want to slow down the cool down process as much as I can. So instead, I'm just going to turn my fire to the lowest possible setting, and the PSI will slowly start to go down. Once that needle doesn't move anymore, then I'll turn the fire off. It's been about 5 minutes with my burner on the lowest setting possible. My needle has stopped moving, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn my burner all the way off, and now the needle is gonna drop all the way down. Do not touch the canner. Don't touch your regulator. Don't touch anything on your canner until not only does this need to reach all the way to 0, but your pop top in the back is going to have to be completely flat before anything is touched. Do not even take this weight off. It's been about 45 minutes since I turned my fire off. The pressure gauge is all the way down to 0 and my pop top is all the way down flat. I'm going to go ahead and remove the weight. Be careful, this is very hot. And I'm just going to loosen my lid so a little bit of the steam can come out. Always open the lid away from you because that steam is really hot. You can easily burn your face or your hands in the process. But I opened the lid just a little bit so some of that steam can come out to slow down the cool down process. Otherwise, you have a risky chance of the jars siphoning, which depending on what you have in your jars, I mean, you're gonna lose the liquid that's in your jars and it could prevent them from sealing properly. It's been about 5 minutes since I loosened the lid. I'm gonna go ahead and take the lid all the way off now and wait about another 5 minutes. It's perfectly normal to be able to smell the food at this point. And sometimes you hear pings at this point as well. Bubbling of the jars inside the canner is perfectly normal, and actually that's what you want. That is a good indicator that these jars will seal. It's been a few minutes since I removed my lid from my canner. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the jars out using a jar lifter. If you've never used one of these before, the flat end is the end that you hold with your hand. The round end on the bottom is what you use to hold your jars. And you're just going to pull the jars out and carefully set them on a flat surface on top of a towel. You want to be careful removing the second rack when you double stack. I'm using a s'mores or hot dog roaster for a campfire just to stick inside one of these holes, and I'm going to pull it out this way. It is going to be very hot. Let your jar sit like this on the counter for about 12 to 24 hours. I usually just let it sit overnight, and by the morning you should be able to remove your rings and check the seals to make sure that they sealed properly, and then you can label them and store them away. It does look like maybe this one isn't going to seal. This is the only jar that's not bubbling. So I'm almost willing to bet it is a reused lid, that this one will not seal. The only reused lid I've got. This was a used lid. We've got several used lids in this batch, but this is the only one that's not bubbling, so this is the one that I'm keeping an eye on. When I check on those jars tomorrow, that one jar or any of the jars haven't sealed, those jars are not garbage. I can put them in the refrigerator and we can eat them within a few days. You can freeze them. Not in the jars though. You're going to want to put them in maybe like a Ziploc freezer bag to freeze them, or you can reprocess them. I would probably not reprocess. We would probably just eat them within the next couple of days. But those jars are not garbage. I choose to store my jars without rings. That's usually a pretty standard way. So once they've cooled down completely, I'll take the ring off, make sure that the lids are cleaned off, and I put a label on, or I'll write the whatever's in the jar and the month and year on the lid, and then store them away in a cool, dark place. The problem with storing them in a non-temperature controlled area like a garage or a shed is that if the temperature changes too drastically with the lids, they can come unsealed and then seal again. And that false seal will allow bacteria to get in. The contents will no longer be sterilized, and you could have some really bad food and you could potentially get sick. But if that's the only option that you have, do what you need to do.